The Minnesota Timberwolves sit just one place above last in the NBA, missing Karl Anthony-Towns with a stack of underperforming talent on the roster. We are going to look at what went wrong, what is going wrong, and where the disconnect lies within the organisation. If you are a Minnesota Timberwolves fan, we are looking at the situation through a different lens. This organisation is currently the worst situation in basketball, and we are going to explain why, offer some remedies to the situation. Welcome to The Inbound with Mac and Josh. So I want to start with management. In 2019, the Minnesota Timberwolves hired Gerson Rosas. He is the president of basketball operations at the Minnesota Timberwolves. He was previously the executive vice president of basketball operations for the Houston Rockets, where he worked for 16 seasons and served under Daryl Morey. Rosas was briefly the GM of the Dallas Mavericks.
Rosas said, quote, "I made the personal decision to resign as general manager of the Dallas Mavericks after determining that the position was not the best fit for me at this point in my career. The decision was made solely by me, as I firmly believe this change is in my best interest. Mark Cuban, the Mavericks owner, asked me to reconsider my decision, graciously accepted my decision, and we part as friends. I would like to thank Mark and the Dallas Mavericks for this opportunity." It begs the question, why weren't these issues ironed out prior to Rose's signing? Just something to keep in mind.
Excellent question. He has a long-term history working with Team USA as an international scout since 2015. Now, his philosophy is a NFL-style coaching staff with two coordinators. Now, ultimately, these two have to funnel their decision through Ryan Saunders, who can dismiss or override a decision. So this format, Rosas brought over separate to the Houston Rockets and Daryl Morey. This is probably the only thing that he has done to this point in his operations career that is separate to his long-time assistant role to Daryl Morey.
Yeah, so a lot has translated over with the Timberwolves, but this is not one of those things. With the coaching staff, we start at the top with head coach Ryan Saunders, the son of the late Flip Saunders, a legendary former NBA coach, head coach that is. Ryan is a native of the state of Minnesota and has been around the NBA in official roles for over 10 years. He started as an assistant with the Wizards under his father in 2009, working there until 2014. He was then brought over to the Timberwolves, again under his father, in 2014 before his father's unfortunate passing in 2015. He was promoted to head coach on January 9th, 2019, after the firing of Tom Thibodeau. He is currently the youngest head coach in the league at 34 years old. So based on our research, Josh and I's, Ryan Saunders has a number of pros and cons, as do most coaches, but for him, his strengths include, but are not limited to, an innate ability to connect and relate with most players, possibly attributable to being close in age to a mostly young roster. He also has an open-minded approach to his team and strategy, including a willingness to listen to multiple sides without expressing bias or stubbornness to do it his own way all the time. And he also has a strong knowledge overall of the game, having grown up around basketball with his father. On the other side of things, his weaknesses seem to include, but are not limited to, a reputation for being too much of a nice guy in a tough role. Due to his age, some veterans have remarked the fact that he is so young can impact the level of respect he commands in a room and or among older players. And he also has a short history, since he has a short career as head coach, of ill-advised substitutions and or shuffling lineups mid-game that have in fact disrupted the flow and chemistry of the team in a given game or even a given quarter.
So he has actually changed defensive schemes, overriding his assistant coaches as well. So that's quite common. He does that a fair bit. Switching to zone halfway through a game or halfway through a quarter even though the team trains solely in drop coverage, which we'll cover later.
Yeah, it's interesting how he does that. With the team generally struggling to get wins since his promotion 2 seasons ago, there have been a lot of calls to have him removed from the position in favor of someone more experienced, inspiring, and or demanding of the team. Wolves owner Glenn Taylor recently had this to say on coaching and the change that could come down the road. Quote, "I haven't even talked to basketball president Gerson Rosas about that. He hasn't brought it up, but you're asking me, and it's probably hard to tell a guy that you aren't doing the job when your best guy," that means Karl Anthony-Towns, "isn't playing," end quote. To be fair, it's worth noting that since Wiggins and D'Angelo Russell trade, Russell and Towns have played a total of 4 games together, which is interesting. It's also worth noting that 2 players remain on the roster from when Saunders was hired in 2019. That would be Josh Okogie and Karl Anthony-Towns. With this level of turnover, it's admittedly difficult to establish a true identity of a team.
They have tried to establish an identity. They brought in a defensive coach. David Vanderpool was lured from Portland to Minnesota. Many across the NBA were surprised Minnesota were able to hire him, and he came over to install a drop defensive scheme based on fighting through screens and maintaining interior structure. After finishing his playing career with CSKA Moscow in Europe, Vanderpool became an assistant coach with the same team and worked in that capacity for 3 years. In 2010, he was hired as Director of Player Personnel by the Oklahoma City Thunder. In 2012, he became an assistant coach for the Portland Trail Blazers. In 2015, he was named to the coaching staff of the senior men's Canadian national team. And in 2019, he was hired by Minnesota as an associate head coach to Ryan Saunders. Now, this defensive structure, the drop defense, in the context of pick and roll, drop coverage is a defensive scheme which calls for the big man guarding the screener to drop back a bit from the pick. The idea being to protect the paint and maintain the ability to recover back to the original man assignment, the roll in the pick and roll. So the guard or on-ball defender needs to fight through the screen to stay with his man to prevent a 3-point shot. Now this requires an athletic center or power forward and a very good defensive guard for it to work effectively.
The big man generally also needs to have quick feet, ideally. Otherwise, obviously, they're going to get lost in the whole shuffle. So on the offensive side of the ball, Minnesota hired former New York Knicks point guard Pablo Prigioni, who was the oldest rookie in the NBA at the time and in NBA history, as a matter of fact, at 35 years old when he was picked up by the Knicks. Prigioni's only assistant role prior to joining Minnesota was with Brooklyn, and he also actually had a previous head coaching role overseas.
Yeah, I think that's important to mention that both of those coaches don't have head coach experience or long-term NBA experience, because a lot of the teams around the league will often hire a young head coach and surround them with NBA level talent. Like if you look at Brooklyn and you look at Steve Nash, he is surrounded by NBA level coaches, head coaches like
Mike D'Antoni, Jacques Vaughn. So
Ime
those two alone,
like there's a lot of good NBA coaches that are on that.
That's a good point, because the Timberwolves, just overall, even from top to bottom, it's a very young coaching staff. So that's important to note. There's a lot of inexperience there in such an important role.
Young team, young coaching staff. And I think that leads into this next point. So we're going to look back at the infamous/famous D'Angelo Russell, Andrew Wiggins trade. So this one is very interesting to look at their statistics now and look at where they are at in their careers since moving on from their respective teams. So D'Angelo Russell currently is averaging 19.1 points per game, 3 rebounds, 5.5 assists, 1.5 steals. I'm just going to say 0 blocks because it might be 1 this whole season.
Gets 1 every now and then.
And his field goal percentage is 43%. His 3-point percentage actually very good at 40%.
Yeah.
Wiggins is very comparable at 17.5 points per game, 5.5 rebounds per game, 2.5 assists, 0 steals, but 1.5 blocks per game.
He's actually one of the leaders right now in the NBA. Like, not near the top, but he's been surprisingly really good in blocking shots.
Well, defensive field goal percentage, opponent's defensive field goal percentage against Andrew Wiggins is astronomically low.
Yeah.
He has been one of the best one-on-one defenders in the league, which is important to note because he was a noted bad defender with Minnesota.
A lack of effort, for sure.
He's come a long way in his short time with Golden State, and I think that leads into how average they've been at developing players and developing talent. They've got lucky with a couple of their picks, just natural talent.
Exactly.
But yeah, they have not developed their talent very well at all. The important thing to note is that the Timberwolves also gave up their 2021 pick. So it's top 3 protected. It's gone to Golden State. Golden State are now in a position where they can pick up an incredibly talented player if this pick falls out of the top 3. If the Timberwolves keep going at their current rate, the Warriors might need some luck to pick up, outside that top 3.
That's to say, if the Timberwolves are garbage all season, which it kind of looks like they are, then the Warriors would definitely need the lottery odds to sort of flip in their favor in some way.
Yeah, so thanks to the flattened lottery odds, if Minnesota end up in the bottom 3 of the league, highly likely, the Warriors still have a 60% chance of getting their pick. So those odds actually jump up a little to 63.4% if the Timberwolves finish 4th, or 68.5% if they finish with the 5th worst record.
Yeah.
This makes the Timberwolves arguably the most undesirable situation in the NBA. The 2021 draft is top heavy with can't miss talent, and Minnesota could be out of the running if they do not land a top 3 pick. Even then, the roster needs an overhaul with their 2022 pick going to the Warriors unprotected if they land a top 3 selection.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that teams are, like, with the lottery odds flattening the way they have to avoid tanking, or to discourage tanking, that is. It's crazy to think that some of these teams are out there still throwing picks around no problem. I would be personally a lot more wary of that if I was the GM. So moving on to the ownership and the franchise side of things, it's actually been considered for sale for a fair amount of time. For most of a year, last year, Glenn Taylor, the owner, has explored a sale of the Wolves and the WNBA team, the Minnesota Lynx, who are actually very successful historically. Yeah. But nonetheless, we wanted to tell you how that's going. So basically, a quote from Taylor, well, it's not coming is the best way to say it. I haven't found anything that says for sure I should move ahead with the sale. Taylor's price tag for the Wolves and the Lynx is estimated to be 1.5, roughly in the 1.5 billion range. With NBA expansion, Las Vegas and Seattle have been mentioned in that. Current team owners would each be in for a reported $160 million as an expansion fee windfall, which means they have to pay for the expansion. Quote, obviously I'm aware of that. You've got to pick your time. Taylor added that there's no definite decision for expansion being made at this point. The other question is now a good time to sell when you don't have fans? And it's not a good time, end quote. It's also worth noting that the NBA is highly incentivized to push for expansion due to the loss of revenue resulting from the pandemic and the way that they had to change the season last year. Despite the expansion fee of $160 million roughly, the money that could be replenished from this expansion could benefit everybody in a relatively short period of time, with Las Vegas or Seattle rejoining the league. The logistics of this have not been fully hashed out, as it's all in the early proposal stages, but to me the likelihood feels pretty high. I mean, the league is growing. It's been growing for years. The revenue side of things hasn't really dipped until this pandemic, so I like the chances of expansion. I don't know about the sale side of things necessarily, because the team could still appreciate, and Glenn Taylor might look at that as continuous profit to sell later. But I feel like nonetheless he's going to move on eventually.
I can't see a relocation being a possibility for a franchise like Minnesota. But I do think that they need to seriously consider moving to Seattle and then allowing another franchise to start up in Minnesota, because moving to Seattle would give them a fresh start. It's an established franchise, so they would just kick up and move, and that would allow them to rebrand and remove their entire situation now and start fresh. So that should be something that Glenn Taylor should consider. allowing him the opportunity to create a new franchise and start fresh in a new city. And then obviously the expansion would be brought in to Minnesota. I don't know what the NBA's thoughts on that would be, but if I was Glenn Taylor, it'd be something I'd consider.
Yeah.
Then again, I'm not playing with that kind of money, so I have no idea what he's going to do. It would be nice. It would be very nice. All right. Now we're going to lead into 2020 and 2021 free agency, and the draft just passed. So, as previously mentioned, Gerson Rosas, the GM or the operations manager, has made it a point to rebuild the roster after he took over just one off-season ago. So, as mentioned, there are only 2 players that remain since he took over: franchise player Karl Anthony-Towns and the 2018 first-round pick Josh Okogie. So the Wolves kicked off this past free agency by re-signing guard Malik Beasley to a 4-year, $60 million deal. That was only hours after the negotiating window opened on the Friday, the first Friday of free agency. It's really interesting that they jumped on his re-signing so quickly.
It is.
Without even receiving any offers or offer sheets. They had no idea what he was worth on the open market. They took a gamble and they paid him. So far, it's actually looked pretty good. His percentages are pretty high.
Yeah.
He's playing really well, and it's actually comparable to the Jordan Clarkson deal, which is about where I'd put him.
Yeah.
It's
funny you say that, because I'd like him in a 6-man role, to be honest. He deserves to start on this particular team right now, but moving forward, let's say on a championship contender or a playoff contender, I think he really slots in well as your 6-man spark plug off the bench. But yeah, his contract has definitely been, he's played up to that level. He's been one of their most consistent players this year. Even though at the time, I 100% agree, I thought it was very questionable that they just jumped on him like a grenade. It was, you know what I mean? It needed to happen ASAP.
It was way too quick for me to re-sign him to that deal. Look, the good thing for Minnesota is the 4th year is a team option. It's a very tradable contract, with the max payment outside of the team option being $15.5 million. So it actually works out to be more like a 3-year, $43.5 million contract, which is way more favorable to the organization.
It's really interesting that they managed to get a team option, because those are becoming increasingly rare.
They are.
With player empowerment and that sort of thing. Team options are very hard to negotiate for, so good for Minnesota, to be honest.
They also re-signed Juan Hernan Gomez to a 3-year, $21 million deal. So he had a very strong end of season in 2020. So after the trade with Denver to land Juan Hernan Gomez, the expectations were to build on this and continue to improve. Since then, the Spanish product has been underwhelming, to say the least.
Yeah, definitely has been.
And we'll get more into that shortly. I'll go through a couple of the player statistics. Traded for Ricky Rubio as a backcourt partner for D'Lo, or 6-man, and this was widely considered to be one of the best moves of the offseason. He was coming off a career year with Phoenix. He was one of the best point guards in the league, top 5 in assists. His points per game were up there. His efficiency was through the roof. So on November 16, 2020, Rubio was traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder from Phoenix alongside Jalen LeCue, Kelly Oubre Jr., Ty Jerome, and a 2022 first-round pick in a trade for Chris Paul and Abdel Nader. 2 days later, Rubio and the draft rights to Jaden McDaniels were traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves in exchange for James Johnson, the draft rights to Alexei Pokusevski, and Minnesota's 2024 second-round selection. This was a good move, but in hindsight and in the offense that they're playing at the moment, it's not working.
It's a bad fit, or it's an awkward fit, not a bad fit. It's hard to get all the pieces on the same page. There's a lot of players that need the ball, and there's only one ball to share. So that's the main problem with them right now. But we'll get into that in a bit.
And it's just the stale offense.
Yeah.
No ball movement. It's often dribble, drive. That's it. That's their whole offensive set.
Yeah.
And it's just not working for Ricky Rubio, who's a noted passer of the ball.
Yeah.
Finds his teammates open. There's just no ball movement for him to get involved.
Absolutely, yeah.
They also traded for Ed Davis as a front court defender and rebounder. Now, this is in my opinion, a poor move. With the way that the league's moving, they had the option to pick up, free agents like Hassan Whiteside, who landed in Sacramento on a $2 million deal. Mason Plumlee, who moved to Detroit, and Bobby Portis, who moved to Milwaukee, all of whom have a larger impact defensively and are better on the glass than Ed Davis.
Yeah.
They are also on very team-friendly deals. Ed Davis is being paid about $5 million, which is comparable to all of those contracts.
Yeah.
In the draft, they selected Anthony Edwards with the first overall pick. Now, we haven't talked about their offensive structure in detail yet, but this pick is curious with the structure that they'd implemented in preseason. For them to pick Anthony Edwards, they would have to change their offensive scheme to get the best out of him. Now, he's taking a lot of one-on-one opportunities, and that's pretty much all he has done to this point in his career, and he's very good in transition.
Yeah.
But that's not the offense that Minnesota need to play.
Yeah, their half-court offense and Anthony Edwards haven't really mixed that well. Again, he's very young. He has a lot of learning to do, a lot of NBA practice to get on board with. But at the same time, it's definitely been a weird fit for them at this stage.
It's just a bad situation to put him in. I think from the player's perspective, you'd want, especially at that first overall pick, the team to kind of cater to you a little bit to get you involved in the offense. But it's mainly been him grabbing boards and running the court. That's when he gets his best opportunities. Yeah. And that's, there's a lot of players in the league that are like that, but this is a guy that could be potentially explosive offensively.
Big time.
And he's getting very limited opportunities, which is why his percentages are so low. And I can't really put that on Edwards. I have to look at the organisation and wonder why they haven't implemented a more player-friendly sort of role for him.
Yeah, no doubt. It's interesting how they've done that.
So they want to run a 3-and-layup offense, which is very common in the NBA at the moment, but it requires off-ball picks, and it requires a center or a big man who can pass off the elbow or at the top of the key.
Like a Bam Adebayo.
Or a Jokic.
Yeah.
That's the offense they want to run, but they've essentially had no off-ball movement and no playmakers on the court. And the playmaker that they do have on the court, Rubio, is often standing in the corner, which is not how you want to run a 3-and-layup type of offense.
Yeah.
So that's the offense they want to run, and Anthony Edwards is notably not an outstanding catch-and-shoot player and has a long way to go in that regard. He relies on athleticism, slashing and driving, and it would have been more effective landing a Tyrese Halliburton or Isaac Okoro to put in the front court with Cat. Now, Halliburton would run as a second guard, a 6-man. He'd be more effective than Rubio in the backcourt with D'Lo. And Isaac Okoro can play the 4, is better defensively, really good in transition, and can hit corner threes. It was, noted that coming out of college, he wasn't a good catch and shoot player, and he could only hit the occasional jumper. But since coming into the league, he's actually been quite efficient in his corner jumpers.
The only thing I would add to that is Halliburton has clearly come out as the front runner, if not one of the top 2 rookies in the race. Picking Okoro at number 1 definitely would have been questionable at the time. You can't argue that. I think they would have picked Edwards for the talent, but I wouldn't have been surprised if they traded down for him, because if they figured out he was a better fit than Edwards at this stage. But nonetheless, I think they just simply went with Edwards because he seemed like the surest thing.
Well, in hindsight, they should have traded the first pick and gone back.
Potentially, yeah.
The fan base probably would have revolted.
It would have been like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Or they pick Wiseman in that first overall pick.
Yeah.
And that's a discussion that we can have a bit later. So who did they pick up at 23?
So with the 23rd overall pick in the same draft, the Timberwolves picked up Leandro Bolmaro. Now, he has been what you would consider or call a draft and stash, where you pick the player and you just sort of leave him in the development stages of things. You don't run him on the court straight away. For this organization in a rebuild, a draft and stash in this situation is ill-advised because Bolmaro is athletically gifted. He's very raw. The T-Wolves were hoping his development would come along quickly in Europe. With players like Vernon Carey, Udoka Azubuike, and Xavier Tillman on the board, who plays for the Grizzlies, he's been really good this year, they could have added some depth in the big man position, power forward, center, for some depth. And then finally, with the 28th overall pick, which they traded for, they picked up Jaden McDaniels, who's been pretty good for them. this was probably the best pick they made on draft night overall, all things considered. McDaniels is switchable, athletic, and raw, and exceedingly talented. According to Cleaning the Glass, the Minnesota Timberwolves score 10.3 more points per 100 possessions when McDaniels is on the court as compared to being off the court. They also have a 3% higher effective field goal percentage, a 2.9% lower turnover percentage, and a 13% higher three-point percentage. So lots of stats to clue into with him, especially on the court. Defensively, the Timberwolves allow 40.3 fewer points per 100 possessions when McDaniels is on the court compared to off. Opponents also have a 19.7% lower effective field goal percentage. They shoot 18% worse at the rim, it's pretty good, and shoot 16.6% worse from three. So he's very effective defensively, clearly based on the stats. Even though the Timberwolves, the Timberwolves have had statistically the worst defense in the league, but that's no fault of Jaden McDaniels. No. All in all, the Timberwolves have a plus 50.7 efficiency differential. That's points per 100 possessions minus points allowed per 100 possessions when McDaniels is on the floor compared to when he's off.
And that starts telling. That tells you just how much of an impact he's had as a rookie.
Yeah.
And that's not in the box score. His box score is, it is what it is for a rookie. But for him to have that kind of impact defensively and offensively as a rookie to allow his team a plus 50.7 differential is
pretty good.
Huge, and it's very impressive in a roster full of young players and players like Ricky Rubio and Ed Davis that are experienced and veterans. They don't have a player that impacts the game as much as Jaden McDaniels
already, which is impressive. So we'll move on to what's been happening this season for them in particular. So far, about 17 games in. So their key players have been D'Angelo Russell. It's no question D'Angelo Russell is one of the NBA's best scorers on his best day. But his problem has always been consistency, with a drop in free throw percentage and a net rating of minus 17.1, which leaves him as the worst rated player to play more than 20 minutes per game and third worst overall, not including that little filter. They've also needed Ricky Rubio. He was brought in to spark the offense and run the pick and roll with Karl Anthony-Towns. Rubio has been unable to make an impact so far. In fact, Rubio ranks equal second worst in net rating in the league at minus 13.1 behind teammate D'Angelo Russell. This season, Rubio also ranks in the bottom three in effective field goal percentage. So a lot of difficulties with him on the roster.
That's telling. Those two are your main providers on the offensive side of the ball.
Main ball handlers.
And they are bottom three in effective field goal percentage, and their net rating is terrible. They're the two worst offensively in the league in net rating, which, that should tell you all you need to know about the Timberwolves and their backcourt situation. If anything, it should tell you about their situation in general.
Yeah, no doubt. They also have Malik Beasley, as we mentioned, and ineffective as a defender, but Beasley operates as a three-point and mid-range specialist, providing 20-plus points per game on most nights. Beasley's not a threat to really pass the ball or play make that much. He's mostly out there to shoot the ball and to score. He doesn't have the vision or the instinct really to play the pick and roll effectively enough to pair with Karl Anthony-Towns. For his role, I think he's really good as the sort of spark plug, like we mentioned, but he's not going to be your playmaker, so to speak. He's safe on this roster in any scheme, really, because of his catch and shoot ability. That's to say, he can fit in with a lot of different rosters.
He doesn't work with the defensive scheme they're trying to run. He won't fight over screens.
Yeah.
And that's why they're giving up so many three-point opportunities, and also drives to the rim, because you leave that lane open to either take a three-point shot, or they drive past a center who is probably Ed Davis.
Yeah.
To get to the rim, and Ed Davis is not quick enough to keep up with guards.
Yeah, it's funny because Ed Davis had a few good seasons where he was one of the best backup bigs in the league. I think it was when he was with the Nets. He really...
And the Jazz.
And the Jazz too, yeah. His stats were actually really good, but it seems like it's fallen off a bit.
They also have Josh Okogie. He's a noted perimeter defender. Okogie has only survived on the roster due to his ability to lock up the opponent's best scoring option night in and night out. He's a great scheme fit defensively, but he is a liability on offense due to his inability and inefficiency to score the ball. He should be trade bait moving forward.
I agree with that.
Unfortunately, I really like watching Josh Okogie play, but if you can't score, then you're out there to basically be on a defensive possession, and then you've got to get him out of the game because you go down the other end, teams will leave him alone.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a liability.
He is.
Juan Hernan-Gomez, he was only trailing Marvin Bagley for his defensive rating at the bottom of the league, and only one place better than D'Angelo Russell. Juan is a better fit offensively with his size and stretchability. However, the minus 8.2 in net rating is not worth the offensive gain. As mentioned earlier, Juan Hernan-Gomez is an average rebounder as well. For his size, he's about 6'9", about 230 or so, and he's just not grabbing enough boards, really. And finally, the most important player on the team, arguably Karl Anthony-Towns. Although a small sample size before being ruled out, Karl Anthony-Towns is the only starting player with a positive net rating, and is only joined by one other rotational player, that's Jaden McDaniels, with a positive net rating. He's not a noted defender as such. He has shown flashes of it, but Cat is in the middle of the pack in defensive rating on this roster. So just wanted to say, he hasn't played enough to really get a good understanding of his impact this season. We do know his numbers are generally among the best in the league, but he just hasn't been healthy, unfortunately. And he's been dealing with a lot of stuff off the court as well. So I think overall, there's a lot to be seen from Towns, particularly this season.
Yeah,
now,
sure.
I just had a question here. If you had to pick one player on the roster, who would you label as untouchable?
Right now, it'd be Anthony Edwards. He would be the only one that I would say, hold on to him, see what he's got.
Wow.
I think everyone else should be on the trade market or shopped.
Okay. I would pick Towns, hands down.
Yeah.
Towns is, to me, the obvious pick, and I would pick him because you can find athletic wings, and you can find guys that can handle the ball, like the D'Angelo Russells of the NBA. I think those are becoming very common. You have guys that are developing their skills on the perimeter. It's very hard to find players that are 6'11", 7 foot, as skilled as Towns, can shoot the ball, has the length and the athleticism, runs the floor. I think Towns is more rare, and that's why I would hold on to him. He does have some noted attitude issues. In previous seasons, he's been known to sort of sulk around the court a bit when they've been losing.
Butler's called him out.
Yep.
Which is, that should be a big red flag for Minnesota.
Yeah.
To have one of the most competitive players in the NBA say that someone just doesn't have that drive and desire to be in the playoffs every season. And also call out him playing Fortnite all the time as well, which is very interesting considering he's a franchise player on $30 million a season.
Yeah. There's a lot of guys that play a lot of video games, but I get where Butler's coming from. Basically to take it a little bit more seriously.
I think Butler's point is that you can play video games if you're, making the playoffs and you're performing night in, night out. The problem that he had with Karl Anthony-Towns is his lack of performance night in, night out, where he'd come out and he might put up 10 and 10, and then the next night it'll be 30 and 20 or whatever.
Yeah.
But there was no consistency in his game. The only thing I would add to that little anecdote saying that Anthony Edwards would be the untouchable player, that it all revolves around their pick this offseason. If they land a top 3 pick, they're fine going forward and they should stick with the roster that they have. If they don't, I think everyone should be on the trade market, and I think they need to look at adding more impactful assets. And we get into it a bit more later, but they also should look at cleaning house in the coaching side of the
team. Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. The coaching staff is just not cutting it at this stage.
We definitely get into that, and we'll talk about that a bit more. But look, statistically, Rosas, the operations manager, wanted Minnesota to be a top 10 offensive team. He thought he had that when he landed D'Angelo Russell and had Karl Anthony-Towns leading the way. At this point in the season, Minnesota ranks 28th in offensive efficiency, and per cleaning the glass play context feature, the Timberwolves rank 27th in half-court efficiency. The philosophy comes from an iteration of Houston's offense, but their failure to fill gaps in the roster left them with a roster not made for that style of play.
Yep.
So their statistics and their volume versus efficiency, shots at the rim, they rank 4th in volume in the league, but their efficiency is 30th. Oof. Their mid-range shots, they're 23rd in volume and 21st in efficiency, and that goes back to having D'Angelo Russell, who's a noted mid-range sniper. Mm-hmm. And beyond the arc, their volume is 19th and they're 28th in efficiency. Now, they're pretty awful statistics.
Yeah. And for that as well, like, it's crazy to think that they're taking it to the rim so often that they're just not finishing that much. So that's a major statistic. Like, layups are, as we mentioned, they want to be threes and layups, and they're not making enough layups statistically to justify the offense. So that needs to improve.
The other thing that is important to mention is they traded for D'Angelo Russell. D'Angelo Russell, his whole career, has been, I would say, inconsistent, to say the least, from three. And he's not a noted finisher at the rim. His inability to get past the second level is noteworthy because he shoots so many mid-range shots. The only time he'll really drive to the rim is if it's wide open and he won't get help defense on the other side. He doesn't finish through contact.
Yep.
He doesn't like contact. And that's not, his fault. That's the way he plays the game. But they traded for him to run an offense that he has proven he's not cut out for. He's not that kind of player. Now, if you change the offense a little bit and allow him to shoot more mid-range shots, I think you'd see that efficiency at the rim go up, and you'd see the efficiency at mid-range and volume go up as well, and that'd equal more wins.
I think they really want him to shoot more threes, but at the same time, his game, like you said, is a lot of middies. That's where he's very comfortable. But moving forward, if they want to do 3 and D, like, it's really hard to move forward with Russell. I agree with that for sure. Now, problems on offense for the Timberwolves have been multi-layered. First of all, they have a pretty bland offense overall, and this is kind of just an eye test comment. It's pretty bland to watch. There's no pre-pick and roll action to create space for the pick and roll.
There's no off-ball screens. That's the most annoying thing for me.
There's no misdirection. There's nothing in the background. Exactly.
There's no cutting. There's no cross-court action. There's nothing happening off the ball. Everyone is standing in the corner waiting for the ball to be delivered to them, which is why, players like Ricky Rubio struggling.
And we've seen that there's footage out there of him trying to create off the dribble, same with Russell, and then you've got guys like Edwards, Culver, Okogie, and all that. They're just standing there. Like, pass me the ball, I'm ready to shoot, but I'm not willing to do anything else.
That's what leads to ill-advised shots. That's why, D'Angelo Russell's putting up contested mid-ranges, and Anthony Edwards' his shooting percentage is way down because teams know what they're going to get. They're going to get one out action, maybe an on-ball screen, maybe, who knows. And if they don't, it'll be an ISO situation where they don't drive past the defender, they don't call a screen, there's no off-ball movement, so they know that it's just a one-on-one game.
The other thing with them is, so as we mentioned, they added D'Angelo Russell to basically run the team, and like you just said, he has a hard time getting to the third level, and that's to say he's a 2-level scorer at this point because of his lack of burst and real explosiveness. So when he's dribbling around, he's very tight with his handles, but at the same time he can't get past you lightning quick, even as much as an Anthony Edwards, whose first step is pretty fast. But that lack of burst does affect his ability to score overall. The team lacks second and third reads on offense, so basically the defense shuts down the first option, the second option generally isn't even there, if that, and then the third read off of that is non-existent.
Doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. The team overall and the offensive coaches are not putting the players in the position to succeed. Instead, they're relying on them to create out of thin air, left, right, and center. Almost every possession you watch, like we said, there's a lack of movement, there's a lack of camaraderie and chemistry, and it's almost like they don't practice enough offense behind the scenes, especially when the way they're playing is not the players in the players' toolkit. And Rubio's usage being very low, it's just basically wasting him entirely. To have Rubio off the ball as a spot-up shooter is a bit of a travesty.
It really is. He's coming off his, as I said in the start, he's coming off his best statistics season ever. Yeah. And his efficiency and everything, his offensive ratings were all through the roof. Mm-hmm. So to land him in the off season, you're thinking, okay, they're going to run Rubio at the point and they're going to put d-russ off ball, which is where he was most successful with Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And they didn't do that. They're actually running Rubio off ball, which makes no sense.
It's a bit confusing.
There's no action to get him the ball and to move other players around off ball. So his frustration on court is noticeable.
Yes.
His inability to get the ball and get open is noticeable.
Absolutely.
And he's disinterested. Why would he run around and perform on offense when no one else is doing it? He's a creator. And they should allow him that opportunity to go out there and call offensive sets. But
absolutely,
they don't.
It's funny because he was a pick of theirs back in 2009, Rubio was. And he was picked very young. I think he was 18 or 19 out of Spain, out of Europe. And he's a basketball genius. He's really good with the ball in his hands.
He was picked above Steph Curry.
Yeah.
Notable as well.
Yeah. So was Johnny Flynn by the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Yeah.
Bad draft.
They had a shocker.
Yeah.
They passed on Steph Curry twice. Imagine doing that.
That's rough.
Yeah.
That hurt my brain.
Yeah.
But yeah, essentially all of the shots they're taking and the offense they're running, it's symptomatic of badly coached players with a very loose offensive structure. This lack of structure worked in Houston a lot more because they had the veteran players who didn't need to be developed further. They had an understanding of their role and what to do from what happens in the second and the third reads and what have you in the offense. They also happen to have James Harden, which is nice, but nonetheless, they're definitely not using their players to their full extent. This is arguably the worst type of system to put around the young players that aren't developed, because they can lead to poor habits and a lack of chemistry overall. Even if you play together for a while with bad habits, you're not going to win games. So that's something to work on, particularly on offense. A good article to reference, just from canishoopus.com. It talks about their offensive strategy being very bland, very blasé, just nothing really special. So go give that a look if you have the time.
Yeah, we'll leave the comment with that article reference down below. And that summary actually came from a comment, M-N-E-M, like Eminem, but not Eminem. So yeah, look, really impressive article, goes into a lot of detail, shows the offensive structure and where the plays actually break down. So if you're interested in the schematics of basketball, then I'd definitely recommend checking that out.
Yeah, that was only released about a week ago. So give that a look on canishoopus.com. So
it's noted that they have a defensive rebounding problem. Now, they're middle of the pack when it comes to rebounding, but that... when you're looking at how many shots the opponents are putting up, it's more to that than it is to their defensive ability. Now, this offseason, as mentioned earlier, they re-signed Hernan Gomez to a 3-year, $21 million deal at an average annual value of $7 million. So he had a really rough training camp and a really rough preseason. They instead decided to insert Jake Layman in the lineup at the 4. Now, Hernan Gomez is rebounding at 11.5% at 6'9". It's about middle of the pack, slightly below average for rebounding at the 4. But Layman's career rebounding rate is just 7.2%, which is way below the average for a power forward. And that number this season has been horrific at 2.9% in 9 games. He has 0 offensive rebounds and 7 defensive rebounds in 127 minutes played.
It's hard to believe he has 0 offensive rebounds.
It's awful. And according to Basketball Reference, 90% of Layman's minutes this year have come at the power forward position.
That's interesting.
So it's notable that they're rotational pieces at the power forward position. I would count Jaden McDaniels in that rotation. He's probably played more power forward than these two. He's defended down in the paint a bit more.
Yeah.
But it's notable that there are 2 power forwards listed on the roster each time the depth chart's released. Below average at rebounding and are unable to influence the game on that side of the ball.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. That needs to improve.
100%.
For the team, and for that matter, the paint defense of the team, basically opponents know they can score down low against the Timberwolves at will. This season, Minnesota gives up 52.3 points in the paint per game, by far the worst mark in the league. Although they block shots at a high rate due to their lengthy big men, these stats are generally connected with more chance to defend in the post, causing blocked or deflected shots. So the high block numbers are a product of teams getting in the paint. Nonetheless, blocks are impressive, but the team just has no handle on keeping guys out of the key and out of the paint. It's really tough to watch.
And it has nothing to do with missing Karl Anthony-Towns either. He is not a noted paint defender. His strength in the paint is actually one of his, probably the weakest part of his game. He's unable to post players up or even defensively defend in the post like other big men. And he really struggles one-on-one defensively against bigger centers like, Jokic and those kind of guys that are able to bully players and also fade away. He feels, I think he just gets happy feet in the paint where he wants to dance around and block this shot over here, but also guard his center. It's impossible, but he tries to guard three players at once. And that's, their inside defense. That's an issue with the scheme, and the drop defense leaves the center one-on-one or two-on-one more often than not.
Yeah.
So that's more a scheme fit, and I think a player fit. They need better perimeter defenders to stop those two-on-one situations in the paint.
I agree.
Defensively, the other player that deserves a mention is Anthony Edwards. His -4.5 defensive box plus minus is dead last in the entire NBA.
That's no good.
His defensive rebounding rate is in the 4th percentile amongst players into his position, while his block and steal rates are in the 12th and 18th percentile respectively. So his rebounding rate is about average, and his blocks and steals are significantly less. But his 108.1 defensive rating is 4th on the Wolves. It's not a great number.
No.
Nor is defensive rating the best evaluator of individual defense, but it means the Wolves aren't getting killed while he's out there on defense. The biggest problem for Edwards is individual effort.
Yeah.
It's his ability to get to the second and third reads on defense.
Yeah.
It's his ability to fight over screens and his ability to move to the next man. He often just goes missing and refuses to go to the next player and next role and next position. He really struggles with that.
Yeah, I think that comes with time overall, just experience playing the NBA game. I don't like to be too hard on rookies for defense and that sort of thing. You would like to see more effort, absolutely. And not only that, but it seems like he's a guy where on defense he's just sort of lackadaisical because it's almost like he's saving his effort for offense, where he's more excited to get the ball and do things with that. But yeah, the defense has not been great for Edwards overall. Lots of room for improvement there.
It wasn't good in his college career either. That was one of the biggest detractors on him coming out of college, was his defensive ability. And that was what, most people considered to be the reason why Timberwolves should trade out of that first overall pick. Because
Fair.
He had no effort on defense.
Yeah.
And the defensive rating when he was on the court was, 150 in the minus. It was not good at all. So he's improved a lot, but I think it's, a testament to having better defensive players around him. And also, I'm going to say that the system has a lot to be desired for this roster. They should play more of a zone or box defensive structure.
Yeah, I agree with that. So we're going to move on to the rebuilding of the team and where to start with that.
This is where things get interesting.
Yeah.
If you haven't been interested to this point, pay attention now.
Yeah, so we wanted to talk a bit about scheme changes overall. So the, quote, high percentage and analytic-driven basketball preached by current 76ers general manager Daryl Morey, former GM of the Houston Rockets, has been successful in part due to having an all-time great scorer in James Harden. Unfortunately, operating with a different roster requires changes to the offense to suit the players. That's speaking in the context of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Operating a pick and roll or handoff scheme with a player as talented as Karl Anthony-Towns would be the move to make, but you would need a consistent weapon or multiple weapons to operate alongside Cat. Similar to the Denver Nuggets, Indiana Pacers, and Miami Heat, Their half-court offense runs through their big men, so that would be for the Nuggets, Nikola Jokic, for the Pacers, Domantas Sabonis, and for the Miami Heat, that's Bam Adebayo. Basically like their point big men or point center.
I think the Lakers run a similar structure sometimes with Anthony Davis or LeBron at the apron or top of the key.
Yeah, LeBron is like an offense on his own, but yeah, that's exactly right. So essentially, you run the offense through the big man at the corner of the apron or the key. Surrounding Cat with length, pace, and shooting will make their half-court offense more effective if they were to follow this scheme. Allowing Cat to dictate the direction of the offense through a series of cuts and off-ball screens. If you really want to see what we're talking about, the Miami Heat are absolutely fantastic at this, one of the best in the league. Basically, there's endless movement, there's endless confusion created off of that, and it makes the defense choose to play the pass, the double handoff, or Cat's shot, which is very effective, his jump shot. So that's something to keep an eye on. If they make any changes, we feel like they should move towards that type of offense.
It often means that you need 3 ball handlers on the court at any given time because you have so many people touching the ball and having to make reads. Players like Ricky Rubio wouldn't work in this situation because of his inability to score off the dribble. He is a shot creator. He's not a shot maker, and it's important to differentiate the two. His offense is created off people moving around him. It's not so much created through his own, movement on ball. Whereas I think if they added someone like Jamal Murray, someone like Jamal Murray, not Jamal Murray, settle down Denver fans, just to handle the ball and also create offense, instant offense. Lou Will might be a good pickup for them for his ability to create offense, but defensively, are you willing to take on that liability? So these are things that Timberwolves have to consider because you can't have Josh Okogie in that system.
No.
You'd struggle to have Anthony Edwards in that system. You'd have to find a way to fit him in. You might have to play him at the 4, to be honest, down low, trying to crash the offensive boards. Or on a pick and roll. But yeah, it's an interesting offense to run, and it would be run effectively through Karl Anthony-Towns, but they really need more weapons and more ball handlers on the offensive side.
One guy that would decently fit into that is Jared Culver, if he was to be given more usage, like a higher usage rate. He would be more effective at this stage, could change drastically if Edwards improves, but he'd be more effective than Edwards in that particular scheme. Malik Beasley, again, not a shot creator, but he is a shot maker, so he could play off the ball to space the floor. That's a piece you would want to keep in that type of scheme. But I think that's a good strategy.
That'd be more a dribble handoff type of situation where Karl Anthony-Towns is kind of reading the defensive moves. There's a screen set off ball. Beasley comes free, hands the ball off. If the defensive player chases too hard, he can then hand the ball back to Cat and let Cat make another read, whether he comes back on another pick and roll, handoff, dribble handoff, or Cat drives to the rim. It's really the offense would be dictated by Cat.
It's a lot of responsibility, but it's exciting to think about it because Cat has such a high potential for this role. Like, I don't see why he can't do it. It's a matter of wanting to do it and buying in from my perspective.
Definitely. I think there's other players they have to make moves is basically the point of this scheme change would be that they need to move players and they need to gain more offensive weapons to effectively make that scheme change work.
Absolutely.
They also have a huge problem with leadership.
Big time.
They have had a problem, since Jimmy Butler called out their young roster and beat their roster with third stringers is the rumor, the news going around or was going around. He called out their inability to take the game and practice seriously. So this is a culture problem and a leadership problem. So this comes from the top. Their culture should be influenced by the ownership, by management, by coaches, and then by the playing group in that order. It shouldn't come in any other way. You look at all successful franchises. The successful franchises mentality comes from the owner hiring players and staff like-minded and in their ability to pursue the same goal. This isn't happening in Minnesota.
I just wanted to say, like you say, it starts from the top down. Glenn Taylor, the owner, noted great person by all accounts, an excellent man, a very generous person, very cordial with the media and what have you, like just a good guy. But at the same time, for years and years, the team has stagnated and hasn't really gone anywhere. I believe he's basically just wanted to see the team appreciate before he sells it, to get the maximum profit from his purchase back in the day. But honestly, it comes down to how serious you are about winning and player development, like you were just saying. And from our perspective, it's just not there. The level of interest in winning games and championships has not been good enough. Not even close.
No, and probably not since the days of having, Kevin Love and Kevin Garnett.
Yeah, Kevin Garnett, yeah.
And they were leaders. They're guys that have a goal in mind and they have a pursuit that, they want a championship and they want to win. Mm-hmm. And that's why both those guys have left.
Well, they've made the playoffs once in 2018 since 2004.
Yeah.
So that's 17 seasons where they haven't made the playoffs except for one time.
Yeah.
So the level of interest in winning just hasn't been there. It's really simple. So I don't know how exactly you change that. Maybe you sell the team to somebody else, but then you have to hope that the person buying really cares and again isn't interested in the profit side of the business and is more interested in the winning side of owning a NBA franchise.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult task to just simply shift a culture, but a lot of changes have to be made. Leadership is a very important thing. Not only did Jimmy Butler call them out back before when he was on the team, but this season, Ricky Rubio, who is a good leader, if not a good fit for the team, like we just outlined, great leader, a good voice in the locker room to listen to and respect. He called them out in game 4. Yeah. And he said there's just no interest in getting better, in following the game plan, which might be deemed ineffective, but nonetheless following it is important to get on the same page. Yeah. And Rubio basically called out the whole team and said this is not good. We're 4 games in and there's already trouble brewing. So what does that tell you about this culture? It's crazy.
Yeah, it's important to note that they do have the youngest roster in the NBA on average.
Yeah.
They only have 2 players above the age of 26, Ricky Rubio and Ed Davis. Rubio's yet to win over the locker room with his play. He has called players out, but his play on the court hasn't been at the level that you would expect.
Yeah.
And I'm not blaming Rubio, and
no.
It's important to say we're not saying that Ricky Rubio is a bad NBA player. We're saying that the scheme that he's been dropped into is not working for his game at the moment.
Yeah.
And the Timberwolves need to make changes to address that.
Agreed.
The other leader in the locker room, Ed Davis, is just not playing meaningful minutes right now, and he's prone to brain snaps. Including almost killing Kelly Oubre the other day with an elbow to the head in midair and getting ejected. So the importance on veteran leadership on a young roster is important, and investing in the development and voice of Cat is essential to his career.
I agree.
So adding players in free agency that can make a difference to the locker room should be a priority for this franchise.
Yeah.
Adding Victor Oladipo in free agency, adding Steven Adams via trade, Draymond Green or Al Horford would be beneficial to the long-term success of the franchise.
Yeah.
Although strong leadership has led to players being traded in the past, most notably Jimmy Butler. The other player that's notable is Kevin Love, who had voiced his opinions on the roster and wanting to win and saying that the Timberwolves weren't giving him the platform to be able to do that. I'm concerned that if they don't add a leader on this roster, that they may see Karl Anthony-Towns fall into mediocrity and, only make the playoffs once in his career. It's a potential Hall of Fame career.
It is.
And he's just not in a position to win, nor does he seem to want to add to his resume. And I could be interpreting things very wrong, but the happiest I've seen him was when they traded for his friend, D'Angelo Russell. Not winning on the court with Jimmy Butler, not making the All-Star games, not playing in the playoffs. It was when they traded for D'Angelo Russell.
Yeah, it's funny. I think when Jimmy Butler was there, even though they were winning, they also had Tibbs as a coach who can be, he's a noted, a guy who rides the players pretty hard and gets on them about bad habits and what have you, which is good.
Yeah.
But I think him plus Tibbs and probably Taj Gibson a little bit, I'm only speculating, but I would say those 3 probably were a bit too challenging for the young rosters. Maybe a few egos were involved with Wiggins and Towns, where it's like, who are you to tell me what I should and shouldn't do? And then maybe they go to the management and say, I don't want to play with Butler. Butler probably didn't want to play with them. I think he would have voiced that, and that led to the team's divorce of the two players and the coach, for that matter. So yeah, leadership is important. If they need to add somebody else, I think the players you outlined are excellent choices.
Kyle Lowry's also off contract. He might be another one that you'd look to add. His veteran presence is,
outstanding.
Constant. He's a really good leader on court.
He'd be a big loss for my Raptors, but anyway.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes. But
even Goran Dragic, if they land him from the Heat, if they decline his team option. But those kind of point guards that system fits, that can create off the dribble but also lead your offense. Draymond Green's a guy that could fit into that scheme as a substitute for Cat, or even on the court at the same time. He can shoot a three, although it's ill-advised. He can shoot it, and you have to respect him from that range. You can dare him to shoot all you want, but if he starts making them, then you've really got to pay attention to him.
And he's got a massive basketball IQ, so having him as the sort of the focal point could be beneficial.
Same as Al Horford, same as Steven Adams. Adams is a really good leader on franchise. He's shown it time and time again. His ability to rally his teammates and protect his teammates as a leader is understated, and he should be a target for Minnesota.
I agree. Yeah. So next season, or next off season, that is the one coming up, is very important for the Timberwolves. The franchise is kind of pending, if you want to use a word to describe them, entirely on the draft position this offseason. So like we talked about earlier with the top 3 protected pick that was sent to the Warriors, if they do land the top 3 pick, the franchise could end up in the hands of Edwards if they keep Cat, and then also one of someone like Cade Cunningham or some of the other prospects. I really like Jalen Suggs. So these guys are potential pickups for the team if
Jonathan
they land that.
Kuminga is exceptionally athletic, very good switch ability. He's a winger, sort of small forward, shooting guard type of player, but he could also, if he puts on some weight, could play power forward. Good shooter outside, good mid-range shooter. You've got to respect him all over the court. And Evan Mobley is the best big man in college basketball, and he could be someone that they look at bringing in to complement Karl Anthony-Towns, because he could play the 4. I don't know what his statistics look like from 3, but he'd be someone you'd have to look at, and then you could potentially play Karl Anthony-Towns outside the paint a little bit more, because he's not a traditional 5. So to bring in someone that can play the 5 regularly and get beat up down low, then that prolongs Cat's career.
Yeah, that would be interesting. For that overall, I think Cade Cunningham is probably the best fit for the team. Cade Cunningham has all-star potential. He could be one of the best floor leaders in the NBA when he makes it to the league, and he would fit pretty well on the roster with the scheme that we've outlined, because he can handle the rock, he can shoot the 3. He's about 6'7", 6'8", so he has outstanding size for his skill set, and you can just plug in Edwards and Cat around them among other pieces. I think that would be a really good fit for them.
Instant offense, creates off the dribble,
athletic,
very creative player.
Yeah,
good
he plays
at finding
smart.
Teammates open.
Yeah.
Low turnover rate. He'd be a much better fit at point guard than D'Angelo Russell.
I agree. Yeah.
Even off ball, if you wanted to keep D'Lo, that's fine. Keep him, whatever you do you. But then you have Cade Cunningham as a sort of roaming point guard. You can put him anywhere on the court. You can play in the corner. You can play at the top of the key. He moves around, and he's very active offensively, and defensively he's got great length. So his defensive IQ is pretty high as well.
Yeah, his versatility and ability to seamlessly fit with teams kind of reminds me of Halliburton. Like a more athletic, a taller Halliburton. Yeah. Halliburton's about 6'5".
Could say that. He's a bit similar in the way that he can play on or off ball.
Exactly.
And spot-up shooting is not out of the question for Cunningham, and that's his size more than anything. He played point guard for such a long time. Yeah. And then he had a growth spurt, and they're like, we can't really play you there anymore, which goes against... the modern NBA.
Exactly.
But yeah, he has all the ball skills of a point guard. He's been playing point guard now with his college team. Yeah. So, I'm interested to see what they end up with at that 3rd pick.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. So at that, with or without a draft selection this season, a high draft selection this season, the franchise needs to at least consider trading Towns.
That's from me. That's my point of view.
I personally think they should build around him still, but it depends on a lot of different factors. But they could consider moving him for a locker room leader and some role players, basically to rebuild the culture.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing overall. If the franchise is serious about moving forward successfully, then a Towns trade shouldn't be out of the question. I agree with that, even though I think they should still keep him.
Yeah.
It's not out of the question because this team, there's so many things to consider fixing. So
just
that's
quickly,
a good point.
Little side note. Franchises trading their main and their franchise player, their cornerstone, is not abnormal. You look at Anthony Davis moving from the Pelicans.
It depends on your return.
Correct. It does depend on your return, and you see James Harden moving this year. He was franchise cornerstone with Houston for years. Russell Westbrook from OKC. Kevin Durant, when he left OKC, he left for nothing. So you get to this situation where your best player becomes a liability to the point that they're off contract and no one wants them because they can just pick them up in free agency for nothing. I think if you're Minnesota, and you've done it before with Kevin Love, you've done it before, which didn't work out, you've done it before with Kevin Garnett. So, what's the difference now?
There's a precedent for sure. When they traded Garnett, they actually had the largest haul in NBA history. They had like 6 players, a bunch of draft picks. So it was crazy at the time.
Yeah.
Ultimately, none of those players are still in the NBA anymore, I don't think. The biggest haul from that was Al Jefferson, if you remember him. Very good low post scorer.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, there was a decent haul there. So Towns could demand a pretty good haul overall in a good return for the Timberwolves. And mock trades that we've sort of drawn up for you guys suggest the team could get some good return. It should be worth shopping around with Towns involved, potentially Russell as well, to see what they can get out there. And also getting some draft capital, as we like to call it. So, did you want to run through a few mock trades?
Yeah, just quickly. If they don't land a top 3 pick, they need to trade into this draft. I don't care how they do it.
It's a pretty loaded draft.
They have to do it.
It's very top heavy.
It is very top heavy. They also there's a bunch of good overseas prospects. There's a Australian player named Josh Giddey, 6'8", point guard. He's really talented, multifaceted.
Yep.
Rebounds really well, crashes the boards, very talented offensive player. So there's players like that are floating around later that you could take a gamble on. But I think for an organisation like Minnesota, you need to dive in and say, okay, we're either hitting a hard reset and we're going all in on this draft and a top 10 pick, or we're going to leave this year alone and aim for next year and try and land the first overall pick. I don't think there's any in between. You either land a top 10 pick this year or you go all in on the first overall pick the year after. The organisation needs to really put a lot of stock into this draft, or they're doomed to mediocrity for another couple of years.
Yeah.
The couple of trades that came up online that we had a look at were Karl Anthony-Towns moving to Atlanta for a return of Clint Capella, John Collins, DeAndre Hunter, and a first-round pick. That would be a very high return, in my opinion. DeAndre Hunter is playing out of his skin at the moment. John Collins is one of the best offensive fours in the league at the moment, and defensive rebounders.
Yep.
And Clint Capella just put up a triple-double with 10 blocks. So that's a really good return. As far as the structure of the team, the way it is now, that's the kind of return you would want. The only player that really works in that format going forward would be DeAndre Hunter. I think John Collins would be tradable and you'd move on from him again because he's an asset and you could get a good return for John Collins.
Interesting, yeah.
A trade with the New York Knicks could potentially land them RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson, and 2 first-round picks in the next 2 years. That's a huge return, especially with the way Julius Randle's playing at the moment. He's a all-star player. And then they've got RJ Barrett, who is just
high potential,
taking step on step this season.
Yep.
And Mitchell Robinson's one of the best defensive centers in the league.
Yep.
And then a trade with the Washington Wizards straight up for Bradley Beal.
That would be interesting.
That would be my preference if I'm Minnesota. just landing Bradley Beal.
Straight up.
And then you try and trade Russell to land in the top 10 in the draft. I don't know what else you have to give up there. You'd probably have to give up McDaniels or, Bolmaro or something like that, an asset, again, to get into the top 10 with Russell.
Yeah.
But I think that situation there, landing Bradley Beal, would be ideal for his leadership and for his ability to carry a team through a game. Yeah. He's really struggling on the Wizards, so I think he'd need certain promises from the Timberwolves that I don't know how much of that they could fulfill. But yeah, he'd be one that I'd really be looking at if I was Minnesota.
Yeah, I think Bradley Beal also, he strikes me as someone who holds himself accountable, so he's not going to mail in games. Because as we're seeing right now, like, he is struggling for sure, and there's endless rumors about him he should ask for a trade and get him out of there, save Beal, blah blah blah, hashtag free Beal. I think it's going a bit overboard, but nonetheless, I think that's a pretty decent haul for them. But yeah, his accountability would be very crucial for the team. I had a little trade, not involving Towns, but actually involving Russell. So for me personally, Russell is not somebody I would want to build forward with, partly because I think he's immature. I think when the team has a good culture around him already, like let's say he was plugged in on a veteran team, people that are going to look down on him and say, listen, you can't do this, you can't do that, you got to be better. Right now, he's the guy that's expected to fill that role, and he does not fill those shoes. I think those shoes are far too large for him. So I would have him in a trade with the Chicago Bulls. I think this one will be a bit spicy here. So D'Angelo Russell, Jared Culver, and Jake Layman, noted rebounding specialist Jake Layman, for Otto Porter and Zach LaVine, former Minnesota Timberwolves, who was actually traded for Jimmy Butler.
He should be in the All-Star game this year. So that'd be trading, a non-All-Star, an asset, and a white shooter for
an All-Star and a pile of garbage. No, I shouldn't say that. No.
He's having a good season, so let's give him props. Yeah, he is. He's actually playing pretty well at the moment.
I might want to double check that one.
You can double check it.
But basically, yeah, getting LaVine back in Minnesota, I think, would benefit the Timberwolves. Mm-hmm. I think the Bulls, it's hard for us to say the Bulls are interested in that trade, but I think they might be interested in Culver, particularly because he has a fairly high ceiling. Layman provides stretch 3, stretch 4 ability with the shooting. Yep. And Russell is a good shot creator. He's a little bit better than LaVine at playmaking. But I just think LaVine needs a fresh start, and I think the Bulls might see that. I feel like LaVine might even be putting in a word like, I need to get out of Chicago, just because I don't think he fits well in that team. But yeah, that's an interesting sort of trade that I had drawn up here.
I don't mind that trade. I think, the Bulls would expect more back from that.
Yeah, especially you could throw in some
Zach
picks.
LaVine.
Yeah.
Zach LaVine's one of the best offensive players in the league at the moment.
It is, yeah.
And his ability to create off the dribble is, well regarded, especially since he was, seen last year as a snub from the All-Star game. I think he's come out and really shown people that he's more than capable of performing at a really high level and winning games on his own.
Career season this year, so yeah, I think he deserves a nod.
Yep.
But yeah, so the next thing we would probably consider looking at changing, I think, would be the coach.
Yeah, I'm about to go into that if you wanted to.
Yeah.
So that's in my summary here. So, look, in truth, moving on from Karl Anthony-Towns to reconfigure the culture is not out of the question. With many of the team's struggles stemming from ownership bending to everyone a Cat's demands. Minnesota has not aggressively attacked the free agent market in years due to financial restraints from the franchise for sale. I don't see them going after any notable free agents this season either. Unless the team decides to use current franchise leaders Cat and D'Lo in a sign and trade to try and land a bigger fish like Kawhi Leonard and clear cap space by moving on from other players in a salary dump style trade. Yeah, it's a big one. The free agent market can see them making a move for veterans and leaders like Kyle Lowry, Andre Drummond, Drew Holiday, and other more affordable options like Danny Green, Andre Iguodala, Trevor Ariza, and Tony Snell to join the young roster. If the franchise remains unsold heading into the 21-22 season, the coaching and VP GM situation could only get worse as they remain in limbo for the foreseeable future. The inexperience in the coaching staff is only aiding the young roster narrative, as no one is prepared to take responsibility for the performance of the franchise. Former player and championship assistant coach Jason Kidd should be considered, although most teams are hesitant following his Bucks and Nets stints. He has drawn rave reviews from Lakers players and staff in the regime there. Ime Udoka, the current assistant for Brooklyn and formerly the assistant to Greg Popovich in San Antonio, has to be considered. In saying that, bringing in a GM who is willing to make the big calls should be the ownership's priority, as it seems the current VP, Gerson Rosas, is struggling to create a basketball identity away from Daryl Morey. The Timberwolves need an identity, a leader, and direction. Without those three things, the organisation is doomed to mediocrity.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think so. Ime Udoka is somebody that I looked at as a candidate as well. I think he definitely deserves consideration. He's been interviewed by other teams as well, trying to hire new coaches. I also had David Fizdale, former Grizzlies and Knicks coach, Mark Jackson, potentially, although he had a bad outing in Golden State on the way out there. A little bit of a soiling of his reputation. But also Adrian Griffin, the current Raptors defensive coordinator, and Jamal Mosley, the current Mavs defensive coordinator. These guys have all received interest from other teams to hire as a head coach. So keep an eye out for that. I think, honestly, Ryan Saunders is definitely on the hot seat, despite what Glenn Taylor said about not having enough of a sample size to consider.
He has to be. Yeah.
Because as we talked about, other players, veteran players in the past, have remarked that he doesn't necessarily command the room as much as you'd like your head coach to, and demand the respect of the players to listen to the scheme and follow through with the game plan. So somebody with a stronger voice, more experience, and isn't going to mess around with the lineups and the strategies, especially when you maybe don't want to admit that you're wrong and you sort of override what another coach says to you. So somebody like that would be a better fit for this team. And generally how it goes is it starts with the coach, and then the GM gets canned, and then the coach might also get canned, and then the players afterwards. So that's generally the order of how things change. Ryan Saunders is kind of an obvious choice as the next change for the Timberwolves. Yeah,
well, a new GM will basically come in with a plan laid out, and they'd present that to the owners upon interview. And they tell the owner, okay, I'm planning on getting rid of these guys and landing these guys. You know, like they have a kind of a drawn out situation of how they think things are going to happen. Whether those things happen or not is a whole other question.
No doubt.
And that could go back to Rosas's days with the Mavericks, where he had a plan laid out and then he got in there and realized he couldn't do anything he wanted. And, you know, ownership had a different idea of what they wanted for the Mavericks. And it didn't work out that way for him. But if you are Minnesota, you have to move cap space. You have to have availability for veterans and leaders. Having the youngest roster in the league, the youngest coach in the league, is not doing you any favors.
I agree.
And Minnesota have a long way to go. And I think their rebuild needs to start now for them to be successful in the next couple of years.
Right now, or at least in this upcoming offseason, there's a lot of big decisions to be made. I think just some closing points from my side of things. I don't think the current ownership is serious enough about winning to proceed forward with that type of strategy. I think fade for Cade or similar is probably the right move to make this season, considering it's a bit of a wash already. The way things have looked, it's just not been fun to watch the Timberwolves play. Cunningham can come in and be the floor general that they really need, in addition to the strategy we laid out for them to run the offense a little bit through the big man at the corner of the key. And also, to that point, I think they should build around Towns and Edwards as well. So those two in unison with Cunningham would be an outstanding trio if they can land him. I don't believe in D'Angelo Russell personally. I think they should move off of him and trade while his value is relatively high.
I mean, he's scoring 22 points a game at the moment, or 19 points per game. I don't remember exactly what that statistic was, but, he's just not working in this situation. He's a good scorer off ball, but I think having him at the point is not working.
Not right now, no.
So the only other solution you could have in that scenario is moving Rubio to your primary ball handler and playing Russell off ball, so that Rubio has his ball, has the ball in his hands for every offensive possession, rather than 50-50 or 60-40 or whatever split they're playing with at the moment. It's not working. And the failure to realise that needs to fall onto Ryan Saunders. You can't even blame Cat being out for that, because that's your point guard, that's your primary initiator. And if your offense isn't working, it's not because Cat's out, it's because you can't draw up the right play. It's not that the shots aren't falling. That's a problem because the plays aren't correct. The plays, there is none. They're getting the ball up court.
Investment in the offense, essentially.
And the defense isn't working either. So they're going hand in hand, where teams are scoring easily in transition. They're not getting back. They're not able to set up their offense or their defense. And it's just all falling apart at the same time.
Exactly.
That falls on your head coach. That's not your players. That's not them missing shots. That's not them not playing to the right structure. That's them playing to the structure, and it's not working.
I think it's a large, it's all addition. If one of the ingredients is off, then the whole thing is off. One thing I've noticed from them this season is that they're a team that beats themselves. You can definitely bet on all the good teams in the NBA. If you're going to beat them, it's not going to be because they beat themselves. For example, the Lakers generally know what to do. They keep their turnovers low. They play within their system. The role players know their role. This Timberwolves team, if they start to get down, if they start to miss shots or assignments on defense, it all starts to compound and sort of snowball, and it turns into a big pile of mess.
Thank you for tuning in to the Inbound this week. That was our coverage of the Minnesota Timberwolves and everything wrong with the Minnesota Timberwolves.
There's a lot.
We are hoping that you enjoyed this different podcast, this different setting, different vibe, a whole new venture for us. We really enjoyed making this week.
Some spicy content for you guys.
Yeah, something different. So look, if you did enjoy checking that out, where can they reach us, Macca?
They can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at the Shootaround Pod. You can reach us on TikTok at the Shootaround NBA Pod. And you can find us on Instagram and YouTube. Just search the Shootaround Podcast. Thanks for listening, and keep shooting.
Yeah, keep shooting, unless you're the Timberwolves, and then you need to change a lot before you can even start. Thank you, guys. Cheers.